said it could be done very quickly. Boris Johnson has admitted at the G7 summit in Biarritz that it won't be plain sailing. Well, joining me here in Westminster is the visiting US Republican Congressman French Hill, who represents Arkansas's 2nd Congressional District. Very nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Indeed, thank you for being with us. Now, obviously, your job and the President's job is to stand up for the United States, not the United Kingdom. From the United States' point of view, what would you look for in a better trade agreement with the UK compared to what you have with the UK via the EU?
Well, I think there's an opportunity with the EU and with the UK for the US to improve our trade position by adopting some of the language that has been worked on for years through the TTIP negotiations as a basis for that improvement. I think America would like to expand its export opportunities both in the EU and in the United Kingdom, whether it comes in the agricultural area or other areas.
Now, the agricultural area, we tend to come back to things like hormone-injected beef, right, and chlorine-washed chicken and all the rest of it. Are those things that the United States wants to sell to Britain or indeed to the EU?
Well, I think the U.S. wants to represent across all of its manufactured and farm products. Those are things that's why I think the discussion will take a long time. I think it will be challenging, but there's a lot of work, as I say, that's been put into place by TTIP over the years, and that's where we should start.
But I mean, in practical terms, what you're saying is, you know, whether we're in or out of the European Union, we're in pretty much the same position.
Could be. I would hope that the United Kingdom would be more forthcoming to American trade than perhaps the EU would be if it's independent of the European Union. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what the final outcome is.
Now, what about what Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats have been saying about Ireland's the Good Friday Agreement, the open border having to be maintained? Is that something you would agree with, that there can't be a trade deal unless that open border stays?
Well, I think that's a critical issue for the United Kingdom. I think that border between Ireland and Northern Ireland is at the crux of coming up with what the plan is for Brexit, and that's something that the UK has to find a way around. We've had that relationship, an open border relationship, since the 1920s. It's integral to the 1998 peace accord, so obviously it's a very important consideration.
I mean, if we leave and as a result we'll leave without a deal and as a result there's a hard border, could you yourself support a new trade agreement with the UK?
Well, I think if the UK leaves the EU, the United States will work constructively to have a good trade relationship.
It might mean a hard border, as we were just hearing. In those circumstances, unless that border was removed, would you yourself block a trade deal?
No, I wouldn't. I still believe that if the EU and the UK determine how they're going to have Brexit, the United States will work constructively under whatever those terms are.
And what do you think, you know, a trade negotiation is give and take.
Right.
What would you think the US might be prepared to give to the UK in exchange for example, access for agricultural produce?
Well, look, I was a trade negotiator back during the Bush 41 days back in the 1990s. I know how hard the work is. I know it has to be a win-win for both sides. The Prime Minister talked about gelatinous pork pies being exported to the United States, for example, or shower trays. There'll be a list on both sides.
But I mean, you know what we really want, which is the service industries and finance more access for our business that way.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the biggest, to me, one of the most important industries between our two countries. I sit on the House Financial Services Committee. And our financial services industry between London and New York and the U.S. and the UK is critical. And we want to see that more open both ways.
But it is an area where Wall Street and the city are in direct competition to a certain extent.
Of course they are, and they have been for centuries.
So would the United States be prepared to give greater access, do you think, to those financial services to back agriculture?
Well, I think that's exactly what the purpose of the two executives, the Prime Minister and the President's negotiating teams, will be centered on. I was pleased to see that there's going to be an economic working group set up to form the special relationship between the U.S. and the UK. I think that will be a good way to have those conversations, particularly as it relates to financial services, come to light.
I mean, there is a certain irony in all this, isn't there, that the U.S. as a sovereign nation has a very big trading negotiating team and a long history, whereas the UK doesn't, and for 40 years it's farmed it out to the EU.
Right. That's a challenge, but I will say
We're sitting ducks, aren't we? For
well,
people
I don't
like
know
you?
about that. We have a great relationship between the U.S. and the U.K. We have thousands of businesses intertwined, $1 trillion of foreign direct investment in both markets. And I think it's a way for both countries to gain. Naturally, all countries that are smaller than the U.S. economy say, oh, it's going to be a challenging negotiation. I can say from my own experience back in the 1990s, small countries are able negotiators. I have no doubt that Prime Minister Johnson will be an able negotiator.
But it is a bit David and Goliath at the moment. I mean, how many full-time trade negotiators are there in the United States?
I have no idea. But I will say this is something the UK has worked on with the US. The TTIP negotiations, I think, are the basis for that language. And I think we'll have a good negotiation.